Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me? Excellent. Welcome to the first Friends meeting of 2025. Quick housekeeping messages, first of all, and I'll stand over here to avoid any feedback. The fire exits, we're not expecting a fire drill, but in case a fire alarm goes off, and it is for real, the exits are either the back to the left where you came in, or the door over here. And don't stay to pick up anything, but go straight out. And the muster area is in the plaza outside the museum, and then wait to be called back in by either myself or museum people. Also, reminder: can you switch your phones, your mobile phones, off, or at least to silent, so they don't disturb us during the meeting? A few parish notices. The 350 trip is now fully booked, which is good. And there's another trip being advertised for in Delane Bus in Lincolnshire, where I believe there are still spaces available. The next issue of the Friends magazine is now with the printers, so should be hitting your doormats in the next fortnight or so. And finally, can I just we'd like to thank everybody for completing the members' survey, which we had a very good response to, and we'll be reporting back on that through the Friends magazine in due course. But thank you everybody who completed that. Now, one thing sadly I'd like to mention is, I'm sure everybody saw the very sad news about Susan Gilbert, who died just before the new year. And if people have any particular memories of her which they would like to keep on record, we will try and we will pull together like a memorial book about her. So if you have any particular fond memories, please send them to me, Tony Dewick. My email address, it's in a magazine, but it's ltmf01@hotmail.com. But you'll find it on the back of a magazine anyway. So please send any messages. And we thought it'd be appropriate to have a minute's silence just in recognition of Susan. So if you can do that now. Thank you very much. Right, I would now like to introduce our speaker, Wesley Tierney, who was the Managing Director of a London Bus Works, and he is currently the Managing Director of the Epping Ongar Railway, and he's also involved with a London bus company with Roger Wright. Now, Wesley's had a passion for London's transport and very much hands-on involvement in keeping the heritage alive and available to the public. And he has had enormous involvement in managing a significant fleet of vintage buses of all eras. So, without further ado, Wesley's going to talk about anything with engines. So, over to you, Wesley.
Thank you. I've been trying to look at using my little mic here, but it seems to be getting a bit of feedback, so we'll go with this one. Thanks very much for having me. My wife, Laura, and I have been members of the London Transport Museum Friends for a couple of years now, and there's a number of faces in the room that I recognise from bus events, so thanks very much for coming along. I'm sorry you're going to have to deal with me for 40 minutes. How do you describe somebody who's 33, who's apparently had a career in transport? Still got a long way to go, a lot of things to learn. I'd say this talk is like a confession. I'm here with you and I'm going to confess all the things I've got up to in my few years of work, my hobbies, and give you a little bit of an insight into sort of what I hope to achieve with the things I get involved in, and so you can get a bit of an understanding of what makes somebody tick that wants to save vintage buses and get heavily involved professionally, not just as a hobby. I've watched loads of these talks, Martin Gilbert, Leon Daniels, Peter, and they all start with pictures of young versions of themselves. So without further ado, here's little Wesley. Top left-hand corner is little Wes sat on my dad Paul's lap outside our family home in Letchworth Garden City. My father was a bus driver when I was born for the company Sovereign Bus and Coach, which took over a lot of what was the London Country North East area, AJS Parkdale, which latter became Blazefield. And in those days, parents could take buses home for their breaks to spoil their bus-enthused toddlers. And you can see there in the middle picture my nanny, probably aged 78 there, I would expect 77, in an SNB. And then the top right-hand corner, Wesley's grown up a little bit more, and that's in Cornwall. That's Newquay bus station as it was. If any of you have ever holidayed in Newquay or gone and visited there with Bristol VRs storming around the block, the bus station was a lot more interesting back then than it is now. It's just a pedestrianised sort of street with pull-in laybys. And every holiday we would go and visit Carol, who looked after the Travel Information Centre, and I would walk away with bus timetables and ticket rolls and then form my own little Travel Information Centre back at home. So it sort of rhymes and reasons, you know, little Leon with his Route Master Matchbox bus and Wesley with his timetables. It usually starts off pretty early, this bug of a love of transport, most particularly buses. I'd say if anyone cut me in half, it would read busman. I absolutely adore buses. Never been interested in routes, numbers, scheduling. I walk into a schedules office and I feel an overwhelming sense of doom, and I escape back into the crew room with all the drivers, and my interest is very much operations, people, getting bums on seats, drivers, passengers, you name it, making people feel happy, valued in an industry that is so much becoming a place where people are no longer proud to say they're a part of it. They keep it quiet in the pub. They don't want to show off about it. But there's now a new generation of people coming in that are shouting loudly, public transport, join it, become part of it. So London Country LR turned Sovereign, that was my youth, going to Babbage Road Garage in Stevenage. Quite often would sit on the laps of the cleaners driving the buses through the bus wash at Babbage Road, steering them better than most of the drivers apparently. So it was on the horizon that something was to happen. I grew up in Letchworth Garden City, which didn't have a bus garage. It had a very small bus network shared between Luton and District, the Shires, running out of Fishponds Road Garage in Hitchin, which is an old United Counties garage, if anyone remembers that, and then Stevenage, at what was the old Dane Street garage, and then split between the two, Luton and District at Norton Green and Sovereign at Babbage Road. And Stevenage bus station was sort of a mecca. I think my mum sort of was fairly intolerable of taking me. Where do you want to go, Wesley? Stevenage bus station. Oh, God, no. Hitchin was interesting as well because two companies would meet, and you can see Hitchin Bus there, which was, you know, a local brand of Luton and District with a hopper buses. This is a fairly rare occurrence, a Leyland National wearing that brand. They were usually little bread van minibuses which weren't very inspirational for young fledgling bus enthusiasts. And that very common livery of the 90s, before Arriva took over everything in Hertfordshire and that neck of the woods, that was the livery you saw everywhere. Hitchin District, Luton District, Stevenage Line. They were very good at local branding, but what they weren't good at was keeping the buses of the local brand in the local area. So you'd quite often have Watford Wide running around Hitchin thinking, my God, this is an extended service. So where did everything start? At school, I wasn't the best of students. I was a comedian. I played up a lot at school, but I loved history. And I used to give history lectures at school about the Second World War. So you can tell the sort of kid I was, sort of a juxtaposition of two halves, almost schizophrenic. And I never really got bullied at school because I was so confident I would take model buses to junior school. And the first person who took the mick out of me very soon realised that I wasn't going to change to suit their whims. But as I grew up, buses didn't appear uncool, but I didn't see a career in them. I volunteered at Duxford as a teenager in the Shuttleworth collection in Bedfordshire, and military history and aviation were very much my interest. I was lucky, my mum and dad always took me to the dentist and to the optician, and I remember going to Andrew Mary's opticians in Letchworth and sitting in the chair being told, Wesley, you will never be a pilot. Your eyes are just far too bad. Get it out of your head. And they were wise words, but I've always been the type of person that thought, I'll see about that. Rightly or wrongly, as you're about to find out. So as a teenager, I became an air cadet in my local town squadron of 248 Letchworth, and I excelled. I loved everything about it. In those days, not that far ago, but it feels like night and day, and I was talking to Tony Francis about it, who'd been a civilian instructor just before we started this, of how much the organisation has changed. In my day, flying was almost a fortnightly occurrence if you're interested in it. It really was very available, and summer camps to RAF bases were aplenty, whereas now a number of the bases I remember as a child growing up or as an air cadet have long since closed. It makes me feel old, but of course I'm not. A lot has changed very quickly in our defence of the United Kingdom. So I became an air cadet, I excelled very quickly, did lots of flying, and at 16 I got a gliding flying scholarship at RAF Henlow in Bedfordshire, and I went solo relatively quickly and was invited to become a staff cadet. And a staff cadet would help refuel the motor gliders, strap other cadets in. And the idea was that the keener you were, the more you were rewarded. And very quickly I ended up becoming an instructor, taking air cadets out on small air experience flights. The first flight would be up, down, the second would be left, right, the third would be yaw and demonstrating a stall. And I thoroughly enjoyed it, because at that time I was 16 flying other cadets, which when you think about it now is crazy, but actually 16-year-olds are pretty switched on these days, and back then it was just the same. I then found out at RAF Henlow, where the Centre of Aviation Medicine was based, that the best way to get more flying or get access to it was to join the RAF, but as I've already told you, it was a limitation because of my eyesight. So I found out that a base called RAF Syerston in Nottinghamshire, which is on the picture on the left, right next to the River Trent, is the home of RAF gliding, the RAF Central Gliding School. At that time it was called the Air Cadet Central Gliding School, run by regular RAF pilots with a big cadre of reserves who had come up through the ranks of the Air Cadets, given up their job in finance or bricklaying, but had a real penchant for flying. And the civil service employed them and gave them a reserve commission. So I went there 17 and a half, moved into RAF Cranwell, which is in Lincolnshire, just down the road. And I worked there for a period of time, about 4.5 years, and did lots of flying as a reservist. Some colleagues there of mine who became very good friends on the right in front of the college at Cranwell, which is the Air Force's equivalent of Sandhurst or Dartmouth for the Navy. And I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I flew the Vigilant motor glider and the conventional glider called the Viking. In 2014, this fleet was stood down, was grounded because of a number of safety concerns. And everyone, even though I was between a flying and a ground base role, everyone sort of looked at themselves and went, well, what's going to happen? And I was only in my very, very early 20s at that point. And I decided that there were probably other opportunities that I needed to go and explore in life. And sitting in a crew room for 6-12 months was not going to suit me. I did a couple of other bits, but I soon left. And I went and worked at North Weald Airfield in Essex as a flight ops officer, helping run the airfield for Epping Forest District Council. Big Battle of Britain air station during the war. It has its history going back even further than that. And my sort of prospects started to develop, because in that job I had a lot of free time, big shifts, but when I was off, boy, I was off. I had 3-4 days off. So I started volunteering and doing more flying, and most young 20-year-olds who are full of themselves, as I was back then, do silly things like drive without car insurance for a day because it's expired and they're on their way to work and found out. I sadly trumped all of my mates. I flew an aeroplane without a valid licence. I got mixed up with a sort of a group of people who, very nice people, but probably a bit sort of, not rogue at all, but people who didn't consider the rules appropriate to themselves, and I was one of those and got myself in a right pickle. I flew again and again and again and again certain types of aeroplanes without a licence, and one day it came to bite me in the behind, and I found the door being knocked by the Civil Aviation Authority saying, "Can we speak to you, Mr. Tierney, about flying without a valid licence?" I thought, oh God. That was in 2014, so over 10 years ago. Something I'm not very proud of. But as you can imagine, a young 20-year-old who's had a foundation in military flying, albeit gliding and light aircraft operation, I should have known better. And in the United States, if you fly an aeroplane without a valid licence, I've read stories of people flying airlines without a licence, and it's a federal system, so they get a rap on the knuckles and pay a big fine. In the UK, it's criminal. So where did Wesley end up? In the Crown Court. In Crown Court, I pled guilty. There were lots of other accusations. I got myself into a real pickle, and I had to fall on my sword. Before that, I had met someone very special, who's in the audience tonight, my now wife, and I'd met Laura about a year before everything blew up in my face. And you can imagine that dealing with having had a quite good career and prospects looking good, all of a sudden being within a world, within an industry of which you're now Satan, and you're not welcome in flying clubs, your face is recognisable because you've put yourself about a bit. And I had to answer that, to friends, family, and it was a humbling, scary experience going to Crown Court. What was more scary was the aftermath. I ended up in a lot of national newspapers. Can do, cocksure, conman, I think was the front page of one of the newspapers. The first two lines were from me. When I stood up in the dock at 23, 24 years old, representing myself because I'd kept it a secret from my parents because Laura and I, young, thought it was the right idea. It suddenly dawned upon me in court that I had made a mistake representing myself. And as I say, it was a very humbling experience because I had to look at myself flatly in the mirror. I wasn't a bad person, I wasn't a nasty person, but I was clearly and obviously intent on doing whatever I fancied doing. Not nastily, not malicious, but if I saw something, I'd go and grab it, and that wasn't right. And it all came to about when I was going into London, where I worked, whilst I was going through all of the court business. And the next day, I was on the tube, and I was staring at myself on the front of the Metro newspaper. And I thought, right, Wesley, you need to pull your socks up. I had a very good circle of friends around me, even some in the aviation world, but as you would imagine, I learnt who my friends were and weren't in that opportunity. And probably Can you hear me? There we go. Probably it was the best thing that ever happened to me because it really shook me up. I had a great partner in Laura who supported me but also wanted me to butt my ideas up, and my parents. I'm an only child. As you can see from the pictures, they were very supportive of my interests. So as you can see from the left-hand picture, Laura scrubs up pretty well as a clippy. We've been together 9 years, and Laura's been instrumental in me sort of becoming a grown-up. In 2017, when I went to court, I then had to sort of reinvent myself, and I thought, what on earth can I do? I am damaged goods. I have a criminal conviction which I've got to wait 4 or 5 years to become spent. No one's going to want to touch me. No one's going to want to be anywhere near me. I'm toxic. Thankfully, a number of people said, you're not toxic. You just need to sort yourself out. Go and get a job. And I wanted a job that had manager in the title, but of course I needed to restart. So I went and became a bus driver. I went to Arriva in Stevenage, moved back in with my parents temporarily, and I said, I'm going to go and become a bus driver. And my dad went, oh no, but it's probably the best thing. So I went and became a bus driver in Stevenage and thoroughly enjoyed it. Got my licence, told them everything that had happened to me, and all of the people I met on that journey were very good in acknowledging that I'd been open and honest about what I'd got up to, why I wanted to become a bus driver. And it was probably the opportunity I needed to get that bug of wanting to drive a bus out of my system. So I drove at Arriva for about a year, became very good friends with the ops manager, who was also a youngster, who's in the Young Bus Managers Network, a guy called David Heckles, who's also gone on to have quite an interesting bus career. And the first day I arrived at depot, I said, this is me, this is what I've done, you're going to hear about it in the crew room, I'd rather you hear it from me. And we became good friends after that. And from Arriva, after about a year of driving with them, a year and a half, there's another local bus company in Stevenage that was independent owned by Julian Peddle. I'm sure lots of you know that name. Centre Bus headquarters is in Leicester. They have operations in Grantham, Luton, Stevenage. At that time, the Stevenage garage was about 35 PVR of buses, so all single deckers, all small routes that a lot of you would remember from London country days that were being run by the council. And I went to start to drive with them, but because there was an opportunity to progress, I'd met their ops manager in the bus station, met some of their supervisors. A lot of them were from Eastern Europe. Interesting, very interesting. One of the senior guys at the depot who I used to meet at the bus station was from Hungary. It's called Balázs. And Balázs had a PhD in history and had driven coaches in Budapest, equivalent to National Express. I said, how on earth, with a PhD, have you found yourself driving for Centre Bus in Stevenage? He said, the house is very cheap, money very good. It was a real useful time for me just to reevaluate where I wanted to go. And very quickly at Arriva, I realised that public transport was something that I'd been interested in as a child hugely, and actually something that I'd probably be quite good at. I like people, quite confident, but I'd mellowed down quite a bit from sort of my younger days. And Centre Bus proved very good. I ended up doing some stints in Luton. For those of you that don't know, Luton has a guided busway system, which is very interesting indeed, especially when you've got weather like that. I learnt a great deal at Centre Bus, and by that point, senior directors within the company had met me and were sort of rooting for my career development. The biggest problem was Laura and I did not want to live in Leicester, where the head office was, where there were some opportunities available. So the advice was, wear your heart on your sleeve, be open and honest, but apply for some graduate schemes. I was very lucky. I studied a degree whilst I was in the RAF in war studies, and so I could apply for the graduate schemes. So I applied to Go Ahead, I applied to National Express, and I heard back from Go Ahead, but National Express got back first, and I went up to Birmingham, to one of the football clubs actually, in one of the big sort of conference rooms, and went for a selection. And like I'm telling you now as friends, what had happened in my life, I said the same to them, and they went, okay, well, thanks for being honest, you'll hear from us. And I thought, well, there's no chance now. And all of a sudden, I got some feedback through the post saying, we'd love to have you on board. So I joined with this motley crew on the left as operations management trainees. And that was the brainchild of a chap called Mark Heffernan, who had come actually from GWR and First Rail. And he was the ops director at that time for West Midlands buses, which are National Express. And he was extremely supportive of me. And I think he saw my potential. So I joined this scheme with these lads on the left, and within 4 months of what was supposed to be a 2-year scheme, I was pulled out of that group and put into a managerial position within the UK Coach National Express group. And I worked on coaches based out of Stansted Airport, looking after what is called the owned operation. Now, for those of you who don't know, National Express predominantly is partner operated. So National Express goes to other bus operators, other family coach companies, and say, can you operate this service from Skegness to Leeds? And they tender for it. Owned operations was National Express drivers, National Express management, National Express owned coaches. And it was to run the airport network, which at that time accounted for 65% of the National Express UK coach revenue. It's huge, huge money. Very important to National Express. And if you imagine what airports are like nowadays when you turn up with your car to park, it's astronomical. It's even more astronomical if you just want to drop someone off for 10 minutes. Imagine what the charges are like for a coach operator. Huge. Just to get access to Stansted Airport coach station was a multi-million-pound investment. So it was an important place for me to go and learn quickly about managing big teams of drivers, over 600, huge fleets of coaches. We had a coach leaving Stansted, as an example, every 4 minutes. So bigger headways, smaller headways, than most London bus routes now. We also operated a huge contract at Stansted doing all the airside busing and all of the car parking with Mercedes Citaro bendy buses. So if you can imagine the complexities of running a vehicle airside, all of the security for drivers, all of the training. So in my role, I grew into becoming the sort of operations manager, looking after all of the airports, Luton, Gatwick, Stansted, Heathrow operations, and our airside busing at Stansted and car parks. That developed into doing some stints within the UK group, so working on projects to help develop our operational footprint in the West Midlands and pushing out into some of the counties. Electric bus development within Birmingham was hot topic. Coventry was to be the first UK electric bus town, city, and I played some roles in that. I ended up becoming the Group UK Operations Development Manager, and that took me to some peculiar areas, looking at how we could grow and maintain our business during COVID-19. And for those that don't know, we actually stopped operating for 4 months during COVID. No National Express coaches across the network, because the network was empty. People did not need to travel in the same way that they had been. So we stood down. And during that time, National Express did the largest network review they'd done since National Bus Company. It was a huge task, and one that I was very proud to play a part in. But when we started operating again, we had to think we have to get people back on coaches, and everyone has been persistently told during the pandemic transport is not safe. So we had to tell everyone that it was safe. And National Express did a huge amount to encourage people back on board. We had UV ultraviolet air scrubbers within our air conditioning on all of our coaches that were scientifically proven to kill the COVID-19 virus. We had to do spacing on our coaches. You can see 50% capacity to maintain social distancing. Working in a bus coach environment gets you to meet interesting people. And I had a driver who wrote a book about dealing with mental health, called The Big Blue Bus. And he did it because his children were growing up in central London during COVID with no opportunity to go and play with friends. I can't even imagine what that must be like as a child. And so he wrote a bus about the Big Blue Bus getting back onto the network, and National Express helped him, and I managed to get him days off so he could get his bus into the local news and get it sold. Ended up getting involved in the Young Bus Managers Network, and I represented National Express Group at the Young Bus Managers Network, and that's me with a couple of our graduate trainees in Portsmouth. And you can see Martin Gilbert there, a regular speaker, and Alex Hornsby, I think he's done a couple of talks for the Friends. A great network to help people develop within their careers, and I found it immensely useful. Very easy when you're in your silo of your own PLC company not to speak to other people, but if you've got career eyeballs, it's a great organisation to join. My director at the time, a chap called Kevin Fraser, who'd been with Wagon, C2C and Trenitalia trains, ended up getting a portfolio helping National Express Group grow its business portfolio. National Express already operated trains in Germany, the Rhine-Ruhr Express, and I ended up getting involved in some projects out there, rolling out safety initiatives. And then came a big dilemma. Stay in the UK with National Express and wait for things to happen, make things happen myself, get the UK coach network up and running. Or my director was moving to America and wanted to take me with him, and I would have moved over there in a director role looking after school bus. Now, if none of you are aware, National Express is the largest operator of yellow school buses in America, which is remarkable. UK company. National Express also own ALSA, which is Spain and Portugal's sort of national bus operator, owned by a UK company. UK's got a lot to be proud about with its transport operations worldwide. So I had a discussion with him and said, I've never even been to America on holiday. He said, it'll be fine. He came round to our house and sat down with Laura and told her all of the good bits, but none of the cons. And by that point, I had got my first preserved bus with one of the lads who I showed you in that picture that I joined National Express with. We preserved this Eastern Counties Leyland National. In fact, it's not Eastern National. It'd never been with them. Eastern Counties, sorry. It'd been with Chase Bus in Birmingham, but it was cheap. We bought it, and as you can see, I spent more time under the bonnet than I did driving it, although it was a lovely bus. And this started to get me to meet more people in bus preservation. And all of a sudden I found out there's this huge world of vintage buses that I'm actually quite interested in. So I had an opportunity to buy a London Country Atlantean AN264. And on Facebook I met a gentleman called Keith Fowler. I'm sure lots of you have heard of Keith. He owns RF539 and a Swift and another RF. Absolutely stunningly presented vehicles. And he used to own a London Country Atlantean when they weren't common, when they weren't rare. And he said, I'd love to come and have a look at this restoration of yours. And I said, well, come on over. You won't be able to drive it because it's knackered at the moment, but I've got this old National. Come over. So he came, and I expected him to turn up in a car, not one of his buses, and he bought this RF. And at the time, I was very lucky. National Express had some facilities that I was using for my vintage buses, which I was very, very happy to take up. And he came to visit me at one of our garages at Stansted Airport and pulled round the corner in this RF. And Laura was with me. She'd made some biscuits. And this RF pulled round the corner. I thought, oh my God, Laura, look at that. And before that time, I'd never really been interested in London transport buses. But the minute I had a ride on this thing, I thought, I was born in the wrong era. This is just absolutely beautiful. And that probably was the worst thing to happen to me, well, probably in Laura's words, because a lot has happened since then. This was only 2020. So before that time, I'd never had any interest, any understanding of London transport, knew they were red, route masters, that's all I knew. So I went for a ride and had a drive of Keith's beautiful RF, and I thought, when we got home, I need to buy one of those, Laura. So Keith said, well, there's a chap you probably would like to meet, because he's got old RFs for sale, and if you're sniffing around that market, he'll be able to sort you out. But he also owns a railway, and I was thinking, I quite like double O gauge. No, he owns a real railway. So on New Year's Day, 2019 or 2020, I think, I drove to Northfleet with homemade biscuits in tow and turned up to go and buy an RF from Roger Wright. And when I arrived, this isn't the same day, I was presented with RF 643. And I thought, oh, blimey, I'm already restoring an Atlantean, this is a bit much. I didn't buy it, but we became very good friends. And I ended up visiting Roger at Epping Ongar Railway with Keith and others. And as many of you know in this room, Jeff is over there, one of our stalwart volunteer drivers. It's a little family. And Laura and I were invited into this little family of Rogers and the Epping Ongar Railway, and the rest is history. There's Roger. I think that's on one of the London Bus Museum running days through Romford. And Laura wasn't my clippy that day, but I said, drive over to Romford and see some old buses. And I think my mum and dad went with her. And when she got to work on the Monday and told all her colleagues what she'd been up to, that, having a day out in Romford Market, driving around in a lot of old vintage buses, I think they looked at her twice. I'm working at National Express. I've met Roger, I'm volunteering. And the yellow school bus is in the back of my head. Move to Florida, Sarasota in Florida, and move with my director, move with Laura. It was a real possibility that was going to happen, but COVID had slowed things up a bit. And the whole industry was reeling from COVID. And I had a long conversation with Roger one day, talking about sort of the background and what I really wanted out of life. And Roger said, well, I'm at a point in life where I'm a bit worried about what I do next. I'm sort of got my whole world around me, but there's lots of things I probably don't want around me anymore, approaching 70. But most pressing of all is I've got a company called London Bus and Truck Limited, which over COVID had to shut, but it didn't need to. But because vintage buses is a hospitality market, it couldn't operate. It wasn't making any money, so we had to close, but got no relief from the government because, of course, it's a workshop, but it's working on old vintage vehicles, which immediately stopped the minute COVID came. So it absolutely ruined his business over in Northfleet. Roger could have continued putting money into it, but by that point, Roger had invested a lot of money in maintaining these vehicles and restoring other people's, and it got to the point where he'd had enough of running a workshop. So naive Wesley came along, and Roger said, well, do you fancy running your own workshop? I can't be involved, but I'll support you as an investor. So after some wrangling, decided opportunities like this don't come along very often, so let's give it a go. So I set up London Busworks, and as you can see in the background, this is Northfleet in Kent. That's what I hoped to achieve. As you're going to find out, I didn't. Running a workshop is immensely difficult. I started off with all the right intent. Get some branding, get some good people behind you. And there's some people in that picture that are still with us now, albeit working for Roger with the London Bus Company. London Busworks traded for 2.5 years. Out of all the startups, within the first year in the UK, 75% of them have gone under. So 2.5 years of running Northfleet, which I think some of you have come and visited on the London Transport Museum Friends visit. It's a sizable place. I'll just go to some pictures. That's our front yard. One of the corners. Buses absolutely everywhere, and probably a lot of you will recognise yourselves in that picture of your visit to us. The business is bringing those buses back like that from the dead, and it's really difficult. You'll see in a second, I've restored some buses of my own and I've had help from friends. It's never a solo investment, but it is jolly difficult. And the problem with Northfleet, and Roger's felt the same, is just huge. Those of you who've been there, 24,500 square feet, 4 great big aircraft-sized hangars. When I started, I thought we're going to need 60% commercial modern work and the rest vintage. And it's actually really difficult to meet that balance, because vintage buses sit where you start working on them forever and ever and ever, because you can't call up a supplier. Now, of course, I knew that. I'm not that stupid. But I didn't quite realise how difficult some of these items are to get hold of. My wife's father-in-law, Ed, actually has a CNC machine and a 3D printer. We started doing 3D printing of parts, but even that we couldn't keep up with. The whole world of vintage bus preservation really cannot justify a pure commercial operation. It can, but only if you're really, really very small. And I'm talking a small shed on a farm with very low business rates. Our rates on this site were hundreds of thousands of pounds a year, and I had to find that. Recruiting of staff was immensely difficult. I thought, well, I'll just get people from the auto industry. I'll get people that have worked on trucks. They have no idea when they open the bonnet of one of these now. Where do I plug it in? Where's my laptop? What do you mean a laptop? I've got your Southwell AEC manual here. Crack on. But I don't understand. I've never taken out a spark plug before. Oh no. Diesel injection, complete anathema to people who'd worked in the automotive or bus world. I found it very difficult, and it was a baptism of fire. But what you are seeing are the product of some vehicles that we have restored. The long and short of it is that this year just gone, in the summer, we had a very lucrative, and those of you that have visited will remember seeing a lot of Route Masters parked around the back at Northfleet that are destined for America. So Roger owned the buses. Wesley was going to convert them into T-buses. And the good thing about Roger is he's got 51 Route Masters, but if something is significant, that's saved. That doesn't go abroad, that doesn't get cut up. But if something is run-of-the-mill, he can make sure it goes into the right hands or goes to conversion and protects the significant vehicles from being cut up. And Roger's done that all of his life, as all of you know in this room. Saved very, very significant buses and spent hundreds of thousands, millions of pounds on his fleet of buses, which we all enjoy. But last year, the American deal stalled. And the American deal was essentially going to be worth a lot of money for London Bus Works. And it stalled, and it stalled. And by the summer, we'd given them their third warning. If you don't pay up now, we're in serious. And it didn't come. So Roger and I had to have a sit down and work out what we were going to do. And the long and short of it is, all of that hard work of a small team of 10 employees had to stop, and I had to put the business insolvent. Thankfully, Roger was able to bring all of the staff into London Bus Company to work on his vehicles. Because many of you will remember from your visit to Northfleet that we were trying to sell the site, or Roger was trying to sell the site, so that we could start to rationalise the empire of buses, so to speak. And thankfully that has come. So this year will be our last year at Northfleet. So it's a huge exercise. There's around about 100 vehicles at Northfleet, and space in a new shed for 24. So unless we go and rent lots of sheds, we've got some serious work to contend with. But it won't be contending for London Bus Works. It's over. However, what have I learnt running a London Bus Works? Well, I've learned you meet a lot of very interesting people, and those people that I have met that didn't want to come and work and trade for us in Kent do want to do it in Essex, but they don't want to do go-ahead double-decker repaints or a Riva double-decker. They want to work on vintage buses, and they want to start a project and see it through and finish it. So what we're looking at, what I'm looking at, is trying to safeguard our collection of buses. Roger has his own facility, and I'm looking at my own options. I've just sent a number of my own personal vehicles off to Norwich to a great big shed where I'm able to park 6 of them for the same price as parking 1 in Essex. So the differences in costs are astronomical. You're probably wondering, what's Wes up to here? Well, that's a place called Enniskillen in Ireland. Whilst running London Busworks, got a phone call. Hello, top of the morning to you. I've got a London bus, would you like to buy it? Marvellous, what is it? Oh, it's 1950s pedigree, or it's a Leyland. Marvellous, we've discovered an RTL that's been hidden in Ireland. Send me the registration. Will do. Google it. Oh no, it's a PD. Okay. Said to this chap, Jimmy on the left, we're not interested, Jimmy, we're not interested, but we'll help you find the right home for it. No, Wesley, I want you to have it. So, cut a long story short, Jimmy paid for me to fly to Ireland to look at his bus that I didn't want to buy. Gave me dinner, lots of Guinness, and then paid for me to fly home. No strings attached. When I got home, Roger said, so how was it? Yeah, interesting. Nice bus, runs well. It had been a trainer for Ribble in northwest England, but he doesn't want very much money for it, and he's such a nice man, Roger. Please, why don't we get the bus? You know, you've always wanted a PD. No, I haven't, Wes. So cut a long story short, we agree, shake hands with Jimmy, and the deal was that Jimmy would pay for Roger and I to fly to Ireland via Knock from Stansted, and then Roger and I would drive the bus back via Belfast, Liverpool, back to Essex. I wanted to do a grand Top Gear style tour, and Roger just wanted to get on the bloody ferry. So all of my plans went out of the window. Roger's now fiancée, Wendy, dropped us off at Stansted Airport. Roger and I went straight to Wetherspoons, pint and a breakfast. It's the earliest I've ever seen Roger up. It was about 7 a.m. And we both arrive at the gate. I go to the toilet, come back, get on the flight. Roger goes to the loo and I take off and he doesn't. Roger missed the flight. So I flew to Ireland on my own, was greeted at the airport with Jimmy and all of the assembled family. Great big metaphoric banner, welcome Roger and Wesley, and there was no Roger to be seen. So I had to drive this crash box, non-adjustable driver's seat bus 720 miles back to Essex in 2 days on my Todd. And when I asked Roger whether he would consider flying to Belfast that same day and I'd pick him up, he said, I've got back home now and Wendy's put dinner on. So it was an interesting event. But running a bus company and preserving them, you get people come out of the woodwork. I have a disease. I like collecting things, but not for collecting's sake. I just like saving things. But what I've realised is that you can't save everything. And since 2020, you're going to now see the level of my disease, because it's all happened rather quick. But I have now realised I can't save every RF. I love RFs, but I can't save them all. I actually don't want to save them all, because what I have found is that there are buses out there that are significantly rare. And there's a lot of RFs, but there's not certain other types. And I've got an interest in restoring them, and there's not many people of my age that are interested in very old buses. So therefore, do I save lots of RFs or do I save quirkier things? And you'll find out as the slides go on that I've tried to save some peculiar things. So I thought I'd focus in on one type. Now, Laura calls this her bus, our London Country Atlantean, and she calls it her bus because I set out on restoring it with about 8 grand in my back pocket, and it soon became a 20 grand. Laura, I need some money off of you, otherwise this is going to go to rack and ruin. Now, if you're restoring it in an old farmer's barn, it wouldn't matter. But what I had done is National Express had said to me, if you want to park it in our workshop during the closed period of COVID and do as much work as you want on it, crack on. So I did that and immobilised it. And the more I delved into the bus, the more I found out this thing was absolutely ruinous. Birds' nests and eggs down the porthole. You can see the standard of workmanship of the previous people. That is an engine mount, completely cracked. New brake shoes, new mounts. That's all the metal inside the gearbox. So the gearbox and angle drive had to be done. Now, when I bought the bus, it was a running vehicle in preservation. It was going out and carrying people. What you're going to see next is some pictures of just the level of scrutiny that this thing needed to return it back to a safe state. Gearbox and angle drive, I think, cost Laura and I £2,500, I think. The panelling now seems to be a small step in the workmanship. But what you're seeing here is one of the drums. Look how many pieces it's in. That is because it was cracked in 7 different places. Every single brake drum was cracked, had big cracks from front to back. Can you imagine one of those exploding on the road at 40 miles per hour? It would kill people. I was really shocked. And so was our bank account. We tried to do everything ourselves, but the mechanical work I had to get help on, and I must give him a shout out. Andy Camp from North Western Motor Services. He speaks with a cross between a Blackpool and Manchester accent, and he would call me up at all hours of the night telling me that he'd found a new part for the project, and sometimes I had to get him to repeat it 10 or 12 times before I realised what he'd got. But everything was just a little bit tired and knackered, and it was a team effort. Laura came every single, I think 6 weekends on the trot. My dad came to help me do it because I'd immobilised it. We got ourselves into a state. And Laura bought us lunch every single day and sometimes dinner. And I said to Laura, do you want to sample some preparation work yourself? And you did some air sanding for about 5 minutes and said, no, I think I'll stick to doing the lunches because it is very hard work. But this vehicle took shape into a Stevenage bus, London Country, new in 1981, into a vehicle that looked brand spanking new. All the attention to detail that I wanted to achieve on the project, everything down to the ticket machine codes for the Almex. What you can't see there is in between that gap is a hinge where you can hinge the frame that holds a ticket machine, and they rattled like mad, and all the drivers put post office paying in bags, Hessian bags in between them to stop the rattle. So I've got one. I wanted everything to be like it was back in service. I'm certain, though, London Country never painted the bolts red. I'm certain they didn't do that. And that's how it ended up looking. And we did that in 6 months. In 6 weeks. And that's next to Keith Faller's SM88. If I whistle stop through some vehicles. So I told you I fancied an RF of my own. And Steve Fell and Ray Reetmaster, who are both members of the Friends, came at the same time as I met Roger, saying, don't buy one of Roger's old wrecks, even though they deserve to be done. You've got enough on your plate. Buy a running RF. So I purchased RF 308, and Steve and Ray had just spent a fortune on doing the interior up, as you can see from that picture. Absolutely beautiful, and that's Laura's favourite bus now. I'm going to whistle stop through these. This is RF 442 that used to live at Nebworth House for 20 years. I purchased that. We took it to the 70th event for RF, so you can see all the paint coming off. That's what it looked like in service, and that's what I'm doing with it. So a full nut and bolt restoration, changing all of the timber, changing all of the flooring. Now, I actually like my buses to have the sniff of in-service about them. I don't like them too shiny, but this one needed it. This one also needed it. This is GS12 that lived at the Walthamstow Pump House Museum for about 25 years and started to rot and decay, despite the best efforts of its owner. And I, with 2 friends, Ian and Mike Speller, whose father was Brian Speller, who was a senior manager in London Country buses, sadly no longer with us. His 2 boys have kept GS15 in the family for 52 years, and we've become like brothers. And they helped me save GS12, and you can see the level of rot and decay. We had to completely rewire the bus almost, and it just felt right. There they are. Ian on the left works in the bus industry, and Mick is a painter. We just wanted to give that bus a proper save home. These spacer bars and these wings are from a Ford truck. They're steel and they rot like billio. And they took a huge amount of work to get into a usable fashion. And as you can see, that's the finished vehicle. We did that in 6 months, working weekends. And there it is at Oxted running day. BS5, Roger and I saved together. We co-own this bus. It was owned by Andy Tanner at Cardinal Buses, and it had been through a few hands in that time. And you can see there within a few months, Roger and I went halves on it. Roger paid for the repaint. I did a lot of the other work. And we've got one of only 2 that survived from that batch. And whenever I look at it, I remember the beautiful story of BS buses not being appropriate for bungalow estates, as our chairman mentioned in his talk. I'm going to whistle-stop through these now because I'm getting the look that we're running over. Paul Baker, who is a member of the Museum Friends, who works within the rail world, has got a large collection of Maidstone and District buses, and he had a health scare recently and reached out to me and said, would you be prepared to take on 2 of my buses free of charge? Mainly through the good offices of Nick Agnew, he got in contact with me. And this is a 1930s Wayman Park Royal Bristol K5G. I think it's beautiful there next to the Green Line. And this is what it looks like now. I think it's going to cost me a small fortune, but it's the only one left in the world. Low height. It survived the bombing at Gillingham in 1940s. One of only 11 buses out of the garage of 60 to survive. And I'm going to restore it alongside this vehicle that Paul passed on to me, XKT 992. That's Peter O'Callaghan, if ever you know him. He's mad on Maidstone and District buses. You never see him smile, but he was over the moon that day. I've got a couple of RTs. This one, 3103, that's what it looks like. Absolutely rotten. I bought it to save it for spares. It could be restored, but it would be 150 grand restoration. Probably take me 10 years. There's plenty of RTs about. I've also got RF116 that I bought for spares. That came out of a hedgerow in Kent. It had sat there for 30 years. That's my RT, 3183. I've owned SM91, but now passed it on to some nice people, one of the info buses. I own SM35 through Paul Carpenter, who's done some good work with the Friends. He just ran out of energy, moved to Devon, and passed this on to me to save. That's another Swift, SMS 753, that I've just about finished. There's some recent pictures of it a couple of weeks ago, so you'll see that out on the running circuit. I just need to put the interior back together, but that's come out very nicely. I've also got a Comma Integral Contender, the only one. Ran with Maidstone and District. It's got a Comma knocker engine. That's it in a snowdrift. And then I've got some Sovereign buses, 2 Volvos, and the Lynx, if any of you must have seen the Lynx knocking about with its Yellow Pages advert. And then the Epping Ongar Railway, I think, is going to have to wait for another time. But all I would like to say is flick straight through to this slide and say, a bit like the Museum Friends, a bit like any organisation that requires volunteers, the Epping Ongar Railway runs over 6.5 miles of track on the closed part of the Central Line between Epping, despite the fact we don't have a station, to Ongar. We have 300 working volunteers, but we are really struggling. We need bus drivers, we need bus conductors. Obviously you need a licence to drive, but to conduct you don't need any prior experience. Out on the railway we have a lot of vacancies for skilled people. Now I know a number of you in this room have come from a transport background. If any of you have ever thought, I fancy joining, or you've reached out to us before but not got the right sort of reception, reach out to me. And reach out to Adam Gorski, who's our volunteer coordinator. All the details online. We'd love to have you on board. And these places don't run without good people like you supporting it. And on to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Wesley. Okay, you can hear me now? Right. Yeah, we have a few minutes for questions. Now, can you wait for the roving microphone because we are being streamed on YouTube? So while you just think about questions, I mean, that's it, Wesley, I'm just gobsmacked how you managed to fit all that career.
We didn't quite fit all of it in.
We haven't even covered half of it,
Yeah.
I know. I mean, is there one message about the Epping Ongar Railway which you didn't have time to say, which you would like to give us?
The railway only exists as a preserved railway because of the private investment that Roger Wright has put into it, millions and millions of pounds. It's been open 12 years now with a key body of volunteers. Some of them that have been with us from day one have ended up marrying each other. We've got couples who met on the railway, married, which is a marvellous thing. But what the Epping Ongar Railway is not is a bluebell. We haven't been around since the 50s and 60s. So we weren't buying rolling stock for twopence halfpenny and parking it for the time when we had lots of money. We're fledgling. We're also not a registered charity yet. But I came on board in January last year to support Roger and take over as the managing director. And we've got a small body of paid staff who work incredibly hard. But we'd love to have 50 paid staff, but we can't afford it. We make all our money at Christmas and 60%, 70% of our money. So we need to transition into the new world. We need to become either a trust or a charity. Roger is looking for escape routes everywhere, not because he's fallen out of love with it, but because it needs to move to that next level. And there are people, probably in the Museum Friends, probably people that are watching online, that might have credible experience, whether it's accountancy, governance, who might think, do you know what, I'd fancy helping that pair get the railway up to speed and move it to that next level. Well, what I'm saying is come and reach out to us.
Thank you, Wesley. Right, does anybody have any questions? And if you can just wait for the roving microphone. There's one at the back there. This is only roving microphone.
Broadsword calling Danny Boy, broadsword calling Danny Boy.
I did volunteer at Epping Ongar a few years ago, and I will say it was a really good experience.
That's brilliant. Thank you for coming along.
That's all right.
Why aren't you there now?
I may be in the future. I don't know. Happy to chat.
Brilliant.
Just a quick question on Epping, actually. So there was talk for some time about extending the line back closer to Epping anyway, so that you didn't have to rely on the buses as much to get to North Weald.
Yep.
Is there any news on that?
I hope Andy Lord is watching this. There are people in this audience, actually, who could answer this question with more authority because they were around the table at the time. But the long and short of it is safe to do so. It can happen. It needs somebody to make themselves accountable for it to happen. So once or twice, Roger literally got a signature away from the then commissioner to say, just get on with it. The main stumbling block is the signalling from, I believe, Loughton to Epping, slowing down the terminal approach speed of Central Line trains into Epping, which would not affect the customer experience. I think it adds something like 40 or 50 seconds. But if you know the headway on trains on that section, you could do that time and time again without anyone noticing. So we just need somebody to make themselves accountable with the correct authority to sign that off. Of course, there's infrastructure that needs to be built. But we don't want to do any of that until we know that it can happen. It's something that I want to start to approach publicly this year. And we need to do that first through our body of volunteers and councillors, get TfL on board. But I'm certain it will happen one day. There's stories about a multi-storey car park and flats going on the site of the now Epping station, and the station being moved, and therefore we could move into Epping Station. I can't see that happening personally. Lovely idea. We're only 150, 200 metres away, which is remarkable. But where we are is on a 60-foot embankment either side, and building a platform there is a jolly lot more expensive than building it next to Epping Station. So watch this space. Any more questions? Does anyone want to buy a bus? Laura says. Any more?
while people are thinking, I had one more, which is you mentioned the fact that your staff at the bus company, they didn't even know how to change a spark plug. Do you see that as a really big issue for heritage buses, in particular, or heritage anything, in the next, even 10, 20 years, that the technology is just so out of date?
Yeah, no, you're completely right. I think if people think of Ensign and the Newman family at Purfleet, they had a large collection of vintage buses that were bolstered and paid for by their huge commercial operation. Thankfully, Peter Newman has set up his, soon-to-be museum in Essex. But without people like that and lots of capital, you're never going to have big sheds with lots of people whittling away building RT bodies. It just isn't going to happen anymore. I have given myself a personal commitment that if I don't do it with Roger Wright, as I mentioned, I'm looking at my options. I've got 20 vehicles of my own. I'm looking at options of how can I sustain restoring them at the rate that I procure them at or get given them, so that they can be enjoyed by you guys, so we can all ride on them together. Skills are going to be very difficult. Just to go a little bit more in depth, the benefit of having companies like London Busworks in the future or smaller fledgling organisations is that I have seen young people. London Bus Company at the moment, we've got a driver who's 22, full-time, driving RTs, crash boxes, RMs, and we've got 2 more lads who are under the age of 20 working for us full-time, who came to us through volunteering as bus conductors at the railway. One is now driving for the Londoner almost full-time and then volunteering with us. These people are about, but they've got nowhere to go. And if they get grabbed through a customer service assistant job on the railways because it's more money, you've lost them. If you catch them at the right age when they're impressionable and keen and don't mind getting their hands mucky, some of them will stay, I'm certain of it. Not all, but some of them will stay for life. And I think the more opportunities I can think of outside of the box to try and help support that, whether that's through my own collection, and I know Roger's always thinking of those things, we'll be better off for it.
Thank you. Any final...
The availability of diesel in the future.
Can you just wait for
People say
Can you please wait for the microphone so that...
The availability of diesel for vintage buses, you've heard, Keith, that there is potential that it might end. I don't work for the Department of Transport, but I speak with Leon Daniels and people in the worshipful company of Carmen who are very educated on these issues. I personally don't see it being an issue for a long period of time. Because buses will run on electric or go hydrogen. Coaches and trucks were just a completely different kettle of fish. And I think as the nation, the world grows into more sustainable energy, wind energy, I've watched lots of documentaries on it, it's not ready, available power. And vehicle fleets need ready available power. So I don't expect diesel to be going anywhere, and I'm not hedging it in my back garden, Keith, so I don't think you need to yet. But the price of it will always be a worry.
Any final questions?
Any more? One more down here.
Can you please just wait for a microphone? Because, so that people who are watching on YouTube can hear the question.
Do you still have an operating base in Kent, or have you closed it down now?
No, so it's still open at the moment. Roger is liaising with the successful buyers, and that contract's all been signed now. At the moment, it's going to be the back end of the summer, whereby everything will need to be out and keys handed over. However, I think there might be opportunities for a little bit of extension to that. But by Christmas, unless there's a handful of route masters running out of their light touch, everything will be out of there by then. And Roger's putting the building blocks in place to secure some of his fleet, as am I.
So your own collection of buses is moving away from Northfleet then?
It is correct. So the majority of them will be based around the Epping Ongar Railway, as is currently the case with about 50 of them. I've got very good connections in Norwich, where my wife's family lives, and we've got a friendship base there who own classic and vintage buses. And as I mentioned in my talk, I'm parking 6 buses in a beautiful shed with power and 3-phase for the same price as parking 1 in Ingatstone in Essex. The availability of storage is probably going to be, Tony, one of the death nails of bus preservation, because farmers, as they pass on, the older generation were more susceptible to letting farmers or people park their old tractors or trucks or buses. Farmers, as you see from all of the business on the news at the moment, it's a commercial game now, and bus preservationists are having to pay a commercial rate. I'm paying a fortune to park things I might drive 10 times a year, and 8 times is being driven by one of my friends. But it's a decision we all have to come to grips with. If something happens in my career, maybe I won't be able to afford it, but organisations like the LTMF preserving certain types, very, very important, but the ready availability of them on the road comes from preservationists and private owners, and I do worry about that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wesley. Thank you. I think that's sort of, we've run out of time, so thank you once again for an excellent talk, very broad-ranging. And talk, which is on 10th of February, here again, which is Paul Ross, talking about the air ferry operation at Lydd in Kent. So I hope everybody can make that, and safe journey home.